One. Hi, everybody. This is Jacqueline Luqman, and welcome to a special edition of Live in Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luqman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media anywhere. And what we are going to do tonight is one of the reasons we are an incredibly dangerous show. I would like to think we're even subversive in a little bit, in a little bit of a way, because here in Luqman Nation, we do not endorse candidates because we don't tell people who they should vote for. But what we do, what we think is very, very important, is to give people information that they need to decide on who they're going to vote for if that's their thing. We also don't tell people whether voting should be your thing or not. That's up to you. That's your right. But here in Luqman Nation, we want you to be informed. We absolutely want you to be informed now, as we are facing a situation where we're having to decide if we're going to vote. Do we want to still participate in voting for the duopoly? We here in Luqman Nation believe that you don't have to do that. And my guest tonight is an example of why we think that's true, because you do have options, and we are very, very pleased and quite honored to be joined by Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for President of the United States for 2020. Mr. Hawkins, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I mean, this has been a tumultuous election season, I guess, but I don't know if it's been any more tumultuous than 2016. I think 2016 was maybe the benchmark for rocky elections for most of us in our lifetime, and we kind of thought 2020 shouldn't have been a surprise as far as the Democratic primaries are concerned, but people were kind of shocked with how things shook out so far. But what has been the Green Party's stance throughout all of the Democratic primary circus and machinations? What has been the Green Party's platform and stance throughout all of that?
Well, for us, every state is a battleground, and we have no faith that the Democratic Party is going to do anything different at the national level than they do in our states. Whether it's fighting fracking, fighting for affordable housing, or going to the national level, fighting against the Iraq war, we always find the Democrats are on the other side, the most of them. Now, we're encouraged that Bernie Sanders got a lot of votes for programs that we also support, like Medicare for All and a full-strength Green New Deal, and an economic Bill of Rights to end poverty and economic despair. So our message now is to people that supported Bernie for those things, we're the campaign where they can continue to fight for those things through November and beyond.
So what are the platform positions that you think outside of Medicare for All? Because everybody understands Medicare for All. But what are the specific platform positions that you think will attract Sanders supporters and grow the Green Party coalition that maybe didn't get the kind of attention that a Medicare for All received certainly in the mainstream media, definitely from the Democrats, that maybe Sanders didn't do such a great job in highlighting himself, that the Green Party is better positioned to highlight for voters?
Well, there are a lot of issues, but I've been leading with 3 life or death issues, and then an issue that Bernie didn't raise, but is an answer to what we always get asked: why are we spoiling the election? And our answer is no, the Democrats are spoiling the election because we've given them the solution to the so-called spoiler problem, which is to abolish the Electoral College and go to a ranked choice national popular vote for president. I mean, we're facing a situation where political analysts have laid out plausible scenarios where Trump could lose the popular vote by as much as 5 million votes and still become president because of the Electoral College, which is an archaic hangover from when the slave owners got some extra votes by calling their slaves who couldn't vote three-fifths of a person, and it magnified their vote. And the Electoral College still plays that role. It magnifies the rural white vote against the cosmopolitan urban vote. So that's one issue where we're raising something that Bernie Sanders didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those three life or death issues are climate, the new nuclear arms race, and inequality, because inequality kills. Life expectancies for the working class are declining because we've had growing racial and economic inequality now for 45 years. So with respect to the climate crisis, I was the first candidate to campaign in this country for a Green New Deal in 2010 when I ran for governor of New York. And it became the signature issue of the Green Party. The problem is the Democrats took the brand and diluted the content. That non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey put into Congress deleted the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, which is crucial, or otherwise we're going to build out new infrastructure and be locked in for decades to burning fossil fuels. They didn't include deep cuts in military spending to help fund the Green New Deal, and they extended the deadline from 2030 to 2050, which is too late according to the climate budgets we get from climate science.
Right.
So we have a plan to get to zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy by 2030. And we can go into the details of that, but it's a $27 trillion plan. Bernie's was $16 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
He was serious. I'll give him that. The rest of the Democrats were not serious.
Clearly.
They were an order of magnitude less. They were 1 to 3 trillion over 10 years, and most of it was subsidies for companies, tax incentives, tax breaks, and they were relying on, profit motive in the market. We want to run a lot of this through the public sector, like we did during World War II. In that emergency, the federal government took over or built a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy that armed the U.S., the U.K., and Russia to defeat the Nazis. We need to do nothing less through the public sector now to make this transition on a rapid 10-year timeline. So that's climate. The new nuclear arms race. We're out of almost all the treaties except the last one, the New START Treaty for strategic arms, expires next February 5th. It's the last bilateral treaty between the U.S. and Russia. There are no negotiations going on. Meanwhile, both countries are modernizing their strategic and tactical nukes. They have this crazy doctrine that we will escalate with tactical nukes to de-escalate in the case of a conventional confrontation. That's crackpot. It's going to escalate to a strategic arm. So what I'm calling for are nuclear disarmament initiatives. Let's cut the military budget and bring our troops back from these 800 foreign military bases. Let's cut the military budget by 75%. Let's pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, unilaterally disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, and then go to the nuclear powers and say we want mutual and complete nuclear disarmament. According to this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which 122 nations agreed to in July 2017, they agreed to the text of it. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country even knows that.
Wow.
Because the corporate state media doesn't talk about it. None of the other presidential candidates are talking about it. It should be a top campaign issue. And then in terms of inequality, I'm calling for an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic despair. A job guarantee, guaranteed income above poverty built into the tax structure, affordable housing through a massive expansion of public housing, and federal universal rent control, which we did during World War II, Medicare for all for health care, free tuition-free public education from pre-K and child care through post-secondary, college, university, technical school, the continuing adult education at public institutions, and then a secure retirement. We want to double Social Security benefits. And when you talk about pension reform, I'm the victim of a 20% cut in my pension that I earned thanks to a law that both parties passed at the end of 2014. So those are the three leading life or death issues, and then we got an answer to the spoiler question.
Yes.
So there are a lot of issues that I haven't even touched on, but those are the ones that I've been leading with.
And that seems like a pretty comprehensive list of issues that do affect and touch everyone across the spectrum. But I want to go back to a couple of things. The spoiler question, because that is the huge question. This is something that I get a lot when people are always asking my husband Abdus and I, who are you going to vote for? Which I just feel like that's not anybody's business, because it seems to me whenever people are asking, who are you going to vote for, it's always in response to us declaring we're not going to vote for a Democrat or a Republican, because that duopolic system is outmoded and it is not serving us. So instead of people having an imagination outside of this two-party system, they immediately want to know who you're going to vote for because they think you're going to vote for Trump. And then they come with the argument, well, why would you vote for a third party? Why would you waste your vote? And why would you spoil the chances of us getting rid of Donald Trump? Because the argument goes, Howie, that a vote for a third party candidate is actually a vote for Donald Trump. What is your response to that kind of reasoning in response to people saying that they don't think people should vote for third party candidates, that you're a spoiler?
Well, the fact is, you vote for the Green Party. It's not a vote for Trump. It's a vote for the Green Party. So that's just simple logic. I would argue that if you vote for Biden and you support Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, college for all, and those kind of reforms, you're wasting your vote. If we never vote for what we want, we're never going to get it. So we have a solution to the spoiler problem, and it won't even be raised. That's ranked choice, national popular vote for president. It won't even be raised if we're not in the right race. So, my thing is, if you're a Sanders supporter, a Sanders socialist who votes for Biden, you get lost in the sauce. They don't know if you're a Sanders socialist or you're a Biden corporatist. You're just another vote in Biden's column, and he's not for the things you would be as a Sanders socialist. Nobody has any question what the Green Party stands for. So the more votes we get, the more leverage we have. I got 5% running against Andrew Cuomo for governor in 2014. He had wanted to run up the vote to get ready to run for president. He wanted to get more votes than his father got, Mario Cuomo, ever got. He wanted to get more than he got in 2010 when he was first elected, and he got less. And so he had to see what we were talking about to compete for the votes we got. And out of that, we got things he had never supported when he was running. A ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, and paid family leave. So my chances of winning the presidency are long, but having a big impact, we can have a big impact, and that's what I would say. Don't waste your vote. Vote for what you want.
I mean, absolutely. I think that brings to mind something that one of my personal heroes, Eugene Debs, says, and I believe he said that I would rather vote for something that I want and not get it than to vote for something I don't want and get that. Because certainly if people vote for Joseph Biden and they are supporting the Green New Deal, they're definitely not voting for a candidate who is opposed to fracking, right? We know that Biden is not opposed to fracking. And certainly we know that Biden is opposed to a Green New Deal. And the idea that voting for a third party, a vote for a third party is a vote for Trump is ridiculous, because that's just not how the math works. So I appreciate your take on it. But also, Howie, there is the issue of national funding for presidential campaigns. What is the threshold that campaigns, that third parties, that any party has to reach in order to receive federal funding for presidential campaigns?
Well, there are two pots of money. One is the federal primary matching fund, and that I'm the only candidate in the country that is going for that. The Democrats and Republicans don't want it because if you accept that matching funds, you can't spend more than $50 million on your primary, which is, the most we ever raised was Ralph Nader in 2000. That was about $8 million. So it's not even a question for us. So what we need is contributions of $250 or less that reach $5,000 in 20 states. And we're at 10 states now. We're very close, and about 5 more we expect to get those primary federal primary matching funds. And that will basically double, because most of our contributions are less than $250. That will basically double the resources we have to get on the ballot. That's a huge problem in itself.
Right.
And to run a serious campaign. The other pot of money is for the general election. And if we pass the threshold to qualify in this election, we'll get it for 2024. And that is 5% of the national popular vote. Major parties are considered those parties that get 25%. And the fund now says they get over $100 million for their general election. But since Obama, they've stopped taking that money because they can raise more from, wealthy people and the corporations. But that would be huge for the Green Party. Now, between 5 and 25%, it would be prorated on the percentage we got between 5 and 25. But it would be tens of millions of dollars. That would be huge for the Green Party. So 5% would be a real breakthrough for us. The most we ever got was later in 2000. That was 2.7%. But look, I think Trump is collapsing. The coronavirus is his Katrina. And even his own supporters are saying, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. There's no national plan to deal with, the shortage of medical supplies. The Defense Production Act is there to use. He's not using it. We need a test, contact, trace, and quarantine program to be able to go back to work safely. He's not doing that. And people are beginning to see that. So I don't think it's going to be that close. I think Trump is, he's never had his unfavorability ratings below 50%. The only problem is that electoral college, as I mentioned earlier. He could lose by 5 million and still win the electoral college.
Right.
That is a huge problem that, we can't delay dealing with that, because if we don't deal with it now and get a campaign going, we'll be dealing with it again in 2024.
Yeah.
And, people then say, well, constitutional amendment to abolish the electoral college, that's hard to do. Yeah, but I believe an idea whose time has come is when these amendments pass. The last one, the 27th Amendment, which says Congress can't give itself a raise before the next election, sat around for over 200 years. It was part of Madison's original 12 amendments in the Bill of Rights.
Really?
And a college kid wrote a paper on why it could still pass, and he got a C, and he got mad, so he started writing to state legislators. And with no organization, no money, he got it going, and it swept through the states in the 80s, and it was adopted in 1992. It was an idea whose time had come, because people were fed up with Congress voting itself raises in the 80s. I think Maine now has ranked choice voting for its electoral college votes in this election. And as they used to say, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. So I think this is an idea whose time has come, and we're trying to make it a campaign issue.
Yeah, and another issue that is an idea whose time has come, Howie, and I think the time has come because of the present crisis we are in, is mail-in voting, vote by mail. What is the Green Party stance on that issue?
Well, what I'm hearing is we want universal mail-in ballots in the 2020 election. That's certainly on my list of, platform planks. And by the way, I'm not yet the nominee. We have a convention in July. I'm leading in the primaries, but I'm not yet the Green Party nominee.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you for that correction.
Yeah, I don't want to presume anything. But yeah, we're talking about, we need that. Of course, Trump's opposed to it because the less people vote, he figures the better his chances are.
Even though he voted by mail.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hypocrisy is not a problem for him. He has no shame.
So now let's get down to some thorny issues here, Howie, because there some of the criticism of the Green Party is just silly. The barbs that people have thrown at Dr. Jill Stein from the last election being tools of Putin, and because of a picture when she went to a medical conference, a legitimate medical conference in Russia, and Vladimir Putin just happened to be sitting at the table with her and like 8 or 9 other people. And, we heard back then in 2016 that the Green Party was part of the reason that Hillary Clinton lost the election. But there have also been some criticism of some issues surrounding like Green Party organization. There were some pretty vocal disagreements in some local Green Party chapters across the country after 2016, where maybe some postmortems were done, and maybe some reorganization needed to be done, and things seem not to work out as smoothly as they maybe could have. Is there cohesion in the Green Party? Should people be concerned about I don't know, in party politics that could spill over and cause fracturing in the Green Party? And is the Green Party as organized as it should be in the run up to a national election?
Well, first of all, the Jill Stein smear that Hillary Clinton brought up again in the fall on, David Pluff's podcast was baseless. I mean, that was the RT gala. She was invited. She paid her own way. And Putin sat down for a minute and somebody snapped a picture and went out on the internet. She didn't even talk to him. So there's a lot of speculation and there's no, investigation. So that's just a smear. And of course, ever since Ralph Nader ran, the Democrats have been whining about the Green Party, trying to keep us off the ballot. I mean, that's to be expected. Mm-hmm. As far as spoiling the election, the fact is the exit polls showed that 61% of her voters would have stayed home if she wasn't on the ballot. That wouldn't have, if that applied to, say, Michigan, where it was closest, Trump still would have won. So, to call her the spoiler doesn't even comport with the facts. And as far as Green Party organization and controversy, we're really grassroots, and people have a chance to speak their minds. And we do have debates, usually healthy. Sometimes, people are people and they get out of hand and, do ad hominem and stuff like that. But I think we're in a pretty good shape right now because the Democratic conflict, the Democratic Party conflict between the progressives like Sanders and the corporatists. I mean, the corporatists let the progressives give speeches, but the corporatists make the decisions. In fact, the corporatists like the progressives to make speeches because it draws in progressive voters who get some idea about what the Democrats are really about. So, and it's not like the Republicans don't have their factions either. So that's par for the course. Now, saying that, I think the Greens could do a lot to be better organized. In fact, one of my themes as I went around the country is we got to be not just activists, but organizers. An activist instinct is, I would say the future of the Green Party is we got to get the people that are alienated from politics engaged. They tend to be lower on the income scale, the working class, the people of color, the young people. And what an activist does is writes up a leaflet and goes out and says, join us, and preaches. What an organizer in a union or a community organization does is goes out and listens and finds out how they can help and builds relationships and trust. So, if the Green Party is going to organize these people who are alienated, they got to see the Green Party palpably in their communities, being there for them. And that's more than we can do in one election, but it's the kind of thing the Green Party's got to do. We don't really have parties in this country. Democrats and Republicans are brands. You don't go to your local chapter of the Democratic Party because you got an issue with fracking or affordable housing or police brutality. There's no place to go. They're atomized at the grassroots and they get messaged by the people with money. A candidate in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is like an entrepreneur. They're a startup. And they go to the investors, the fat cats, and say, invest in my campaign. It's like a capitalist market. And the investors pre-pick who we get to vote for in those primaries before we get to vote. And so for the average person, there's no way to participate in the Democratic Party except vote in primaries and general elections. We're trying to create a party at the grassroots where people can come and speak and act for themselves and talk to each other and think things through and be smart and develop themselves. So I think that's the direction Green Party organization's got to go. And, I've always said we got to build this from the bottom up. We should be electing thousands of Greens in the local office and in state office and Congress as we go into the 2020s. We have about 150 elected officials. That's more than any party on the left since the heyday of the Socialist Party. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to that 500,000 officers that are up for election in this country. So we can do a lot more. And I think, that's the direction we got to go, which, of course, then people say, well, if that's what you believe, why are you running for president? And the answer is, in about 40 of the 50 states, the vote we get in the presidential election determines whether we have a ballot line for the next election cycle.
Right.
And having a ballot line makes it a lot easier for our candidates to get on the ballot. Petitioning requirements are less. It's harder to challenge petitions and so forth. It's usually 1, 2, or 3% in the states where the presidential vote affects your ballot line. So those are real objectives to support local organizing that we can do through a presidential race.
I really love how you said that the Democratic and Republican parties are not really political parties, they're brands. That is the absolute truth. That is, there's no better way to describe the two of them other than what we always say here in Luqman Nation, the two wings of the same evil bird. So then, Howie, I got to ask you this question because a couple of our personal friends said to us, we were really turned off about what Howie said about Julian Assange. Well, what do you have to say to people who were not happy with the comments you've made in the past about Assange?
Well, I've made probably half a dozen statements in the course of this campaign saying the charges against him are illegitimate. He should be freed right now. And it's a matter of free speech for all of us because he published information that was leaked to him. And if he's prosecuted and convicted for that, then all media is under threat. Because when we find out what our government's doing, it's usually from leaks. Whether it's the New York Times, the Washington Post, or WikiLeaks. Now, I was in an interview and I did say that I thought Julian Assange was wrong to be direct messaging with Trump Jr. during the 2016 campaign, particularly saying contest the election if you lose. Because, I don't think Julian Assange maybe understood this. We have a racist right group of terrorist groups that if they got the signal, and we see them, in these demonstrations going on the last week, they're going there with guns. They're looking for an opportunity to, hurt some people. And I just thought that was wrong. But that is independent of the fact that I completely support him, the charges being dropped and him being freed.
Yeah, independent journalism is absolutely critical in this time in our country because if we did not have the freedom to say what we want to say, we wouldn't be able to do this interview right now, and certainly people would not be able to see the kind of content we do produce here on Luqman Nation, and you wouldn't be able to get the messages out that you and the Green Party and other alternative parties are trying to get out to give people choices and options. Now, Howie, I want to ask you, what is your message to, because people are always asking political candidates, what do you have to say to middle-class American voters? I don't want to ask you that question. I want to ask you, what do you have to say to disaffected Black, Latino, Native American voters who have lived through a literal physical history of and can walk by that history, live in that history every day of their lives of this government under both parties doing nothing for them, and they feel that there is nothing for them to vote for, so they don't want to participate in voting at all because, after all, regardless of who they vote for, a Republican or a Democrat, nothing changes for them. Their neighborhood doesn't change, their barrio doesn't change, their reservation doesn't change. What do you have to say to those people who have opted out of a system that truly has opted out of supporting them and their needs? Why should they consider voting for the Green Party?
Well, again, I'm speaking for myself as a candidate, not everybody in the Green Party. I think the answer to white racism is Black power or brown power or indigenous power. What we've got to do is, look, people have racist attitudes. They're slow to change, but there are living, breathing racists in position of power that we need to remove. the gatekeepers that determine whether you go to a school, you get housing, you get a job, you get treated, how you get treated in the criminal justice system. And so, or by the police. So what we need, for example, with policing, community control of the police. I mean, I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as a teenager, the Black Panther Party rose, and their thing was, power to all the people.
That's right.
In their own communities.
Mm-hmm.
And an intercommunalism that Huey Newton talked about, where we're in solidarity with each other. And so I think that's the kind of program. So when I call for Medicare for All, I actually call for a community-controlled national health service, where we don't just have national health insurance with a single public payer paying for the services to private delivery, but we take over a decade the hospitals and clinics as public institutions. Doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers are salaried public employees, and the whole system's controlled by locally elected health boards, so that we can ensure that all communities have the health care resources they need. And we're not, having hospitals competing for customers buying more MRIs than they need, and then there are no clinics in the neighborhoods. So I think, community control and empowerment of these communities, that means resources. For example, when in the way we would do the Green New Deal, we would not give to the states and the mayors the resources to build the new infrastructure we need. We take it right down to the community level, which is what the War on Poverty did for a minute, maximum feasible participation in the mid-'60s. And all these mayors were saying, they're organizing against me. Stop that. They told the mayor of Syracuse actually got there before Mayor Daley did in Chicago when Johnson pulled it back. But that's exactly what we need, so that you don't have, frankly, racist politicians allocating resources to the powerful interests. The Democratic Party talks a lot about diversity, but not equality. It's one thing to put a few tokens in high places, faces in high places, but if we're not talking about real equality, the diversities are covered for inequality. So those are some of my thoughts on that question. And, we can talk about policy from, I'll just mention one more thing. We got a clean house in the law enforcement agencies.
Oh, yeah.
ICE and the Border Patrol, we need to just abolish them and have a new agency to deal with that. And the people that work in those agencies, they can apply and they need to be vetted, because we know from those Facebook posts in the Border Patrol, something like more than half of them were on those Facebook pages with all these racist messaging going on. And we know that's true in a lot of police departments. That's why we need community control of police, so we can weed out the racists and the sadists. We need to clean house across the board. Or when it comes to criminal justice prosecution, we need to pay public defenders the same salary as prosecutors, and make sure that every defendant can get a defender. So we need more of them. Because right now, over 90% of the people that are charged cop pleas because they can't afford good defense.
Right. People don't understand that the plea bargain system, it is a system, is a racket. It is an absolute racket. And it ends up funneling more people into prison just because they're poor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that here in New York. You may remember the case of Kalief Browder.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was accused of stealing a backpack. He was 16 or 17. He spent 3 years in Rikers Island, some of it in solitary. He got beat up by the guards. He got beat up by some of the gangs in there. Had a terrible time. And then his charges were dropped after 3 years, after waiting 3 years for his trial.
Right.
Which is a violation of the Constitution, the speedy trial provision. And it messed him up so much, he eventually took his own life.
Mm-hmm.
And his brother Akeem was so mad about it, he ran for mayor in New York to try to rectify that as the Green Party candidate. There's so much to do. And I should also mention reparations. Because,
yes, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want that bill to have a study commission for reparations passed as soon as possible.
And that is H.R. 40, the bill that
right.
Howie Hawkins is talking about.
Right. And I believe we need to study because the African-American community hasn't stated their needs yet. And there's always been a debate how much individual reparations to families who definitely need some reparations, and it doesn't go back to slavery only. Look at what happened after the Great Recession. Black America lost half its wealth. Its homes were literally stolen by people like Steve Mnuchin, who's now the Commerce Secretary, and Treasury Secretary, and Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary. They did predatory lending and foreclosures and this robo-signing, which was computerized fraud to steal people's homes. So just that alone requires reparations. So Black America has about 1/10 the wealth of white America on average among families. So they could use individual reparations, just to, get a better start and, get a down payment on a house or whatever. But also collective reparations, building institutions in the Black community. That's what James Foreman first demanded when he brought the Black Manifesto to Riverside Church. Said the churches and synagogues should fund Black newspapers, radio stations, TVs, and the Black Research Institute, so that we could change the system. Because if you just give people money and the racists and the capitalists are still in charge, they're going to end up with that money in the end anyway.
That's right.
So we need system change along with, reparations. So that's why we need a commission to study it, but not too long. I mean, justice delayed is justice denied. So I think that's the next step. And there are other communities, we got to honor the Indian treaty rights.
Yes.
We haven't provided the services we're obligated to, the U.S. government, and we've stolen lands that the treaty said was Indian land. There's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. There are Mexican-American land rights in New Mexico that have been violated. And then this whole war on drugs. We need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to figure out how to repair the damages to mostly poor communities of color that were devastated by this war on drugs. Today is 4/20, the day a lot of people talk about marijuana legalization. And I have to say that both Trump and Biden are opposed to legalize marijuana.
Yes, they are.
Marijuana arrests have actually increased over the last 3 years. And, there are hundreds of thousands of people now in prison, very vulnerable to coronavirus, whose only problem was they were possessing marijuana, a drug that is probably less harmful than tobacco and alcohol, which are legal. So there's so much to do.
There is so much to do. I'm so glad you mentioned coronavirus, because obviously the response to this pandemic is completely, it's negligent, and it's almost bordering on what we believe to be criminal by this administration. But, the Democrats' response is not that much better. Joe Biden is now focusing on blaming Trump for not holding China accountable, whatever that means. What would your response be to a crisis of this nature? Because this is what we believe in Luqman Nation. We believe that this crisis is just the dress rehearsal for the coming climate crisis, because I think we have reached almost a point of no return in many regards. And in some ways, maybe this little reprieve where the world is on quarantine has given us a little bit more time in that regard. But I don't think that time is very much. And I do believe that we are going to see, because of the environmental damage that we have done to the planet, we're going to see more of these outbreaks, these kinds of localized epidemics and global pandemics and other kinds of issues that affect populations around the world. So I don't think this is going to be the only time in whatever's left of the history of humankind on this planet that we're going to be facing these kinds of crises where we're having to determine, do we quarantine a country and risk the economy collapsing? So what would a plan from Howie Hawkins for president, as president of the United States, look like in a crisis like this in the future?
Well, it wouldn't look like what Joe Biden is talking about. He was asked by Chuck Todd on Meet the Press because of Trump's totally incompetent and, he's a sociopathic narcissist, which is a fancy way of saying he doesn't care about us, he only cares about himself, and that's showing in his response, which I would call negligent mass murder. And Biden was asked by Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, do you think Trump has blood on his hands because of this response? And Biden said, that's too harsh. I mean, does he want to beat Trump? And does he have an alternative plan? The thing I would say is, first thing we got to do is invoke this Defense Production Act and get the supply chains and production organized to provide the medical supplies that the medical providers need to treat the coronavirus problem. And then there needs to be, and also to roll out a comprehensive test, contact, trace, and quarantine program so we can go back to work safely. To relieve the people that now are not working and can't pay their rent or their mortgage. There's a bill that Ilhan Omar put in last week, which is consistent with what I've been advocating. It's called the Red Mortgage Cancellation Act, but it's more than that. It removes obligation for people to pay their rent and mortgage right now and has the federal government pay it. Because you don't just want to hit small landlords, credit unions, community land trusts, cooperatives, housing cooperatives, community banks, because if they start going under, and already millions of small businesses, half the jobs in this country are from small business, and half of those businesses don't have more than a month's cash reserves. So it's almost a month now. They're out of luck. They're going out of business, and with them those jobs. So the Ilhan Omar bill provides paying the rent and mortgage, has the federal government pay it so that the small business sector, as well as the larger ones that own these things, are not being hurt. So the economy's not being hurt. And the other thing which I really like is that it sets up an affordable housing fund so that, and what it requires is any rental properties that go on the market have to notify HUD, and then nonprofits, public housing authorities, local governments have the first right of purchase. So in this crisis, we could expand our social and public housing to make it, more affordable housing available. So that's a program. $2,000 a month for every adult and $500 for every child for the duration of the crisis. I think federal rent control, like we did during World War II when rents were going up because we were putting all our resources into arms production, would be appropriate at this time. We need a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures and utility shutoffs, which I haven't seen Congress address.
Right.
Some of the states have.
Right.
But I think that's a huge issue. And then, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco came out with a study saying, after wars, economies rebound quicker because they got to rebuild a lot of stuff. Whereas after pandemics, and they go way back in history, there's a long term of depression because you don't have to rebuild stuff, but the demand is out, people don't have jobs. It takes a long time to get the economy going. So coming out for economic recovery, this is a time for the Green New Deal. Because we got to replace these factories that run on dirty energy and produce pollutants. We need zero waste, clean energy factories. So, for example, a big one is cement, which is 5% of the world's carbon footprint because they throw calcium carbonate. The calcium carbonate hardens the cement when it's heated, and the carbon goes into the atmosphere. That's why it's 5% of the world's carbon footprint. There are other ways of making cement. So we got to replace the old cement factories with the others. Same with steel production, plastics, all of the technologies. So that is the way, and that's a massive investment. That will get the economy going. And then finally, I got a whole list of things. I'm not sure I'm remembering it all, but important. We talked about this. We should have universal mail-in ballots in 2020 so everybody can vote.
Well, Howie Hawkins, I am going to give you the last word to tell our viewers on the live stream right now and everyone who will watch this video later why they should look into Howie Hawkins as a candidate for the Green Party nominee for president for 2020.
Well, as you quoted Eugene Debs, it's better to vote for what you want and not get it than to vote for what you don't want and get it. A vote for Biden is a wasted vote if you're for Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, college for all, and all those kind of reforms that Bernie Sanders was for. If you want to see the election system change so we don't have the spoiler dilemma hanging over us, the Green Party ticket is the way to go. And people can find out more about my campaign by going to my website, howiehawkins.us. Sign up, you'll get bulletins that are informative, tell you what we're saying, what we're doing, not just we need money, which we do. You can donate on the website, you can volunteer to do stuff, but that's the place to find out more about the campaign.
Howie Hawkins, thank you so much for this conversation tonight. I really appreciate it because, as I said at the beginning of our talk, we do not endorse candidates here in Luqman Nation. We kind of got out of that business in 2016 because we saw how emotionally invested people got with their presidential candidates, and we lost friends because we were criticizing folks. And it's just, we're journalists, so we wanted to be as unbiased and to try to be as dispassionate in this conveying of information as we can be. But what we absolutely want to do is make sure that the people who come to Luqman Nation get all of the information they need to make an informed choice. So I really, really appreciate you coming onto our platform and giving people more information that even I knew about you and your candidacy. And I really, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
And as always, friends, thank you for watching. This is Jacqueline Luqman, one half of Luqman Nation, with a special evening with Howie Hawkins, candidate for Green Party president. What, I'm just saying that wrong. Candidate for the Green Party nomination for the presidency of the United States for 2020. As always, if you like the information you see and hear here on Luqman Nation, like our page on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com, Luqman Nation, LuqManNation. As always, be very good to each other, and peace, but only if you're willing to fight for it. Good night, y'all.